Good evening, Malaysia, and welcome to another live Q&A session organized by The Star. My name is Joshua Lim, and I'm your host today. And for the next half an hour, we'll be talking about the COVID-19 vaccines. As most of you are already aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a lot of suffering and distress over the past year. Malaysia has recorded more than 285,000 cases and nearly 1,100 deaths since the start of the pandemic. I think I speak for all of us when I say that we are tired of this virus and we just want things to go back to normal. Well, there is hope, and it may come in the form of vaccines. The first batch of the COVID-19 vaccines has already arrived, and the vaccination program is set to begin very soon. While this may be good news, some are still hesitant to get themselves vaccinated. And that's understandable because there's so much information and conspiracy theories going around social media that it's hard to tell what's true and what's not. Which is why I've invited Professor Abhi to this session today to help clarify some misconceptions and to help us get a better understanding of the vaccines. Now, Professor Abhi is a professor of genetics and the dean of the School of Medical and Life Sciences at Sunway University. He's also the chair of the International Network for the Government Science Advice, Asia. And a little fun fact, in 2016, he made history by becoming the first Asian to be awarded the Best Science Communicator at Fame Lab, which is the oldest and largest science communication competition in the world. Professor Abhi, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Joshua and the Star, for having me here. But before we proceed, I would like to first state that first, I do not work directly or indirectly on any of the current COVID-19 vaccines that are currently available in the market. Second, it's really important to disclose all of this. I have been involved in some of the diagnostic testing support in the country, but all on a pro bono basis. And third, I do not have any forms of consultancy or receive any forms of financial benefits from any pharmaceutical companies or vaccine production companies. My main goal of doing this today is really, to play my role as a geneticist, as an educator and a science communicator, to really hopefully help to distill the science that we have and hopefully help clarify some of the questions my fellow Malaysians have, and hopefully, together we can promote a greater understanding of how best, we can really equip ourselves to fight one of our, if not the biggest, really a huge challenge that I think our generation has ever faced as a human race. So, I think the arrival of those vaccines certainly has got us all excited. And the floor is back to you.
Yeah, I think that's a good disclaimer that you've given over there. I think the main takeaway here for those who are watching this session today is that we're not trying to say like, hey, what you believe is wrong, or we're not trying to belittle you or anything. We're all here just to help, because I feel, again, there's a lot of information that's going on, that's going out there, and it's being passed through WhatsApp and social media, and we're just here to provide perspective in a situation that's constantly evolving, and there's always new news coming out, and how do we interpret this news is kind of like the purpose of this live Q&A session here today, to give a better understanding. So when it's our time to make a decision, we make an informed decision. So with that said as well, if anyone has any questions, feel free to share them in the comments section, and we'll try to answer them later. We have a dedicated so-called viewers Q&A session, and that just so stick around, and then we'll address your questions in a while. With that said, let's get this Q&A session going. And I think, when it comes to the vaccines, as I've talked, in my discussions with people from different backgrounds, from all sort of like occupations and different perspectives, I think the main concern that the public has is safety, right? And I think this stems from the fact that the vaccines were developed in such a short time. So it makes people feel like it was rushed. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the vaccines were rushed and thus are unsafe?
So, Joshua, thanks, and I think it's a perfect start to the discourse. And actually, while the rate in which these vaccines were produced is truly unprecedented and really a remarkable feat, and kudos to the teams that have actually achieved this. And the reality is that this was an emergency situation that really warranted an emergency response. But that does not mean that the companies bypassed safety protocols and did not perform adequate testing. So for me, and I think for the scientific community, we are aware that it is neither rushed nor shortcuts were made to compromise effectiveness of safety. But perhaps there was this greater sense of urgency, which I think sometimes the scientific community can be blamed for, for the lack of progress. And I think that seeds some of the doubts. There are many reasons to why this rate of vaccine production was as fast as it is. First of all, the huge amounts of money that was actually invested. Many pharmaceutical companies invested significant resources into quickly developing a vaccine for COVID-19 because it was worldwide impact, of the pandemic, because everyone got affected by it. And the funding by the industry and governments across the world was also unprecedented in that scale. And to be fair, I think this is a huge lesson to some of the battles that we have, for dengue and many of these orphan diseases out there, that, if there is real strong global will, we could actually make a difference. The second thing is that the SARS-CoV-2 virus may be a novel virus, but it's from a family of coronaviruses that has been well studied. And remember the SARS epidemic, and then the MERS-CoV epidemic, in this century, though not at this scale, it meant that these researchers have had time to establish many technologies and techniques, and that's made it easy to study this virus and really find the solutions for it. And I guess the new technology at the center of this current COVID-19 vaccine is called messenger RNA. As a geneticist, I get so excited when my ministers talk about RT-PCR and mRNA, and when public talk about science, because that's always been a big issue, right? Wanting to get people into science. But the thing is that just because it's become into public consciousness, it does not mean that this technology is actually that new. In fact, it's been widely used, in many different studies. In fact, there was already a clinical trial on a cancer vaccine using the same mRNA technology. But as you know, cancer, it's not a single, factorial disease like the SARS-CoV-2 virus here. So, its efficacy hasn't been as great as what has been seen in the two mRNA vaccines, Moderna and also Pfizer-BioNTech. Finally, the companies also put in their vaccines through rigorous clinical trials. Tens of thousands of volunteers underwent these clinical trials. And because of how prevalent COVID-19 is, that's also important. One of the reasons why we were not early clinical trial, sites was because we did not have enough COVID-19 patients or cases. But around the world, there were so many cases, and therefore it only took a few months for these clinical trials to collect enough data to make those initial evaluations and say, okay, basically, with institutional and independent vaccine experts, we now know that the data from these trials were deemed the COVID-19 vaccine safe and effective for emergency use. And, with regards to safety, right? I mean, the COVID-19 vaccines can have side effects. And permit me to just, share this analogy by my friend from USM, Dr. Kyria's analogy of vaccination is like a martial art training, be it taekwondo, silat, or silambam. In the process of training, you are bound to get some bruises, aches, and pains fighting a pretend opponent. Just like the side effects from vaccination. COVID-19 vaccine developers report that some people, experience pain where they were injected, or body aches, headache, or fever lasting a day or two. These are actually good signs that the vaccine is actually working to stimulate our immune system. But because the fighting is controlled, the effect is limited and temporary. And when your training is complete, you will have a better chance of winning when confronted with an actual bad guy who might actually harm you. And the reality is that there will be differences in how good you get after trained between you and me. And you won't believe this, but I actually had a black belt when I was 13 years old. Today it's now hidden underneath my folds of fat. And clearly, the level of training and perhaps me keeping trained might actually, or not trained, might actually affect my outcome. So just like martial arts, they can't prevent someone running into a bad guy on the street. A vaccine cannot completely shield us, from being exposed to a germ. But they train you to be better prepared, stronger, and less likely to get hurt. And I think this is really an important segue, to some of the discussions that we're going to have. We're not saying that this mRNA is like an invisible cloak. But what we're saying is that while there will be people who will react, and we'll probably talk about this, in an adverse way, the reality is it makes you stronger, it protects you, and you're less likely to get hurt. Over to you, Josh.
Yep. So what I'm hearing here is that, when it comes to this technology that people are saying are new, like mRNA, what I'm hearing from you is that this is something that has been in development for quite some time, and it has been and because of that development, we are finally ready to employ that for this novel coronavirus, which as well, even though this version of the novel coronavirus is new, it's something that the scientific community has been looking to address in a more faster and efficient way throughout these years in the past.
Absolutely, John.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are, but I think people are concerned about the side effects here, and some would say if vaccines are safe, then why are there reports of people suffering from serious reactions and then possibly dying after taking the vaccines? What's your take on that, and how should we as citizens and viewers, what kind of attitude should we adopt when we look at these type of articles coming out as we continue to kind of develop a perspective around vaccines?
Yeah. Okay, so I find it a bit ironic that my answer is going to be, first of all, media blaming. The reality is that I think this is something that we unfortunately suffer because our whole life needs to be entertained. I mean, there's always an element of sensationalization. So just like fake news is 6 times more will reach faster than actual news reaching you. It's the same thing with cases. We don't hear about all the cases where there's no reactions. We will actually hear about cases when there's actually an adverse reaction, and that automatically alters our perception of the real prevalence of this. So for example, let's try and put this into perspective, right? Because just as I alluded earlier, as with any vaccines or medication or any forms of intervention, there will always be a small proportion of individuals who will be susceptible and might experience severe allergic reactions to certain ingredients of the vaccine. But when you look at the numbers, for example, in the US, and we're lucky right now, many countries have already had millions of their population being vaccinated. So for example, in the US, out of close to 10 million Americans who have actually been administered with the vaccine, there were only 50 reports. This means that for every million doses administered, 5 individual cases happen. Of course, for that 5 individuals, it is a serious event. But 74% of those cases occurred within 15 minutes of vaccination, which means that they were at the vaccination center. And these numbers are replicated even in the UK, where there were only 130 reports of anaphylaxis or anaphylactoid reactions. And I'm sure, we all heard about the first two, adverse reactions. It was spread out in almost all media portals. And this is after 7 million doses that have been administered. And closer to our home, Singapore, the numbers of adverse reactions are also very, very low. And so on top of that, all recipients in the context of this mRNA vaccine who experienced this anaphylactic shock also recovered after prompt observation and treatment. Which is why, we should be really, really happy in Malaysia. And I think for most parts, the recipients of vaccines, people are not going to just shoot and say bye-bye. So it's very obvious that after you have been inoculated or injected with the vaccine, you will be watched closely for at least 15 minutes. And basically, only after you have not actually developed any, sort of allergic reactions or adverse allergic reactions, only then the second dose will be administered. And this is why, Tan Sri Jamila, for example, who's, supporting and leading much of this initiative, together with the Ministries of Health and Science, has been trying to recruit, volunteers. Because as we now move into the multiple phases of the National Immunization Program, we need to have many, many volunteers. And like, for example, at my school, at the School of Medical and Life Sciences at Sunway University, we're now seeking volunteers from our student nurses and students from biotech and biomedicine to actually come and support this whole program so that we can also care for the patients before and after. And also, we need to make this very, very clear that the National Pharmaceutical Control Bureau of Malaysia monitors the safety of COVID-19 vaccines, which is why, like, for example, the Sinovac vaccine, we will only approve for its use after the results of the clinical trials. And really, vaccines will only be approved for use if it's demonstrated to be safe and effective in clinical trials. And also the manufacturer, right, will show that it can produce in a high quality, consistent and controlled manner, and also the logistics. Can you imagine, right, how stressful the pilot must have been when he was actually flying the vaccines? Because all of these are really being monitored and regulated. But I know some of you may have read about, the Norway cases, right? So, for example, the Norwegian Medicines Agency announced that 23 deaths were associated with adverse reactions to COVID-19. And that was the first reports that all of us saw, and it probably is still the highest cited reports that you actually see.
Right, I saw that report as well, yeah.
Yeah, and following that, the reviewers then, the regulators, including WHO, Global Advisory Committee, and the Norwegian teams, they looked at the deaths, and they actually found that many of them had pre-existing diseases, very frail, and some had weeks or months to live. And actually, there was no specific risk of vaccination in elderly patients in the totality of the population that they've actually vaccinated. And so, I think no one is saying that there will not be these adverse reactions. But what we are trying to say is that as more and more doses of vaccines are being administered around the globe, more data is becoming available for analysis. I believe that, we will start gaining more confidence rather than the opposite. And I think with continuous and proactive safety monitoring, which I think is in place in Malaysia, and I think there's a lot of vigilance within our community now. I think, sometimes vaccine hesitancy does not mean a lack of trust in government. I actually believe that to a certain extent, it's also showing that the society is also trying to understand the risks and trying to, really be assured. And it's part of evolution towards getting vaccinated in the end. And I think that's the one way to ensure continuous safety of these vaccines.
Prof. Abhi, I actually wanted to save this for later, but it seems like, there are a lot of people asking this question. There are claims that the COVID-19 vaccine can affect women's fertility. Is this true?
Okay. So that's a great question. In fact, one of my friends who studied at Cambridge with me, a theoretical physicist, sent me this, asking me for some clarification a couple of months back. The COVID-19 vaccine, all right, I think we need to clearly state this. The COVID-19 vaccine has not shown to affect fertility, and there's absolutely no scientific basis why it should, right? The confusion arose when there was a false report that surfaced saying that the spike protein on the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and this spike protein is what that actually enables the virus to attach and enter through the ACE receptors in our cells and to infect. This spike protein was claimed to be the same as another spike protein called the syncytin-1, which is involved in the growth and attachment of the placenta during pregnancy. So you could imagine why then that link between fertility and COVID-19 came. And it's really unfortunate because this false report then went on to claim that getting COVID-19 vaccine would cause a woman's body, to attack the spike protein on the placenta forming cells instead and affect her fertility. All right, so, this is false. So while the two spike proteins are completely different and distinct, just like all the proteins that make us into the beautiful and functional individuals that we are, all proteins, are made up of amino acids, and they may share some similarities, but they are sufficiently distinct in sequence and structure that the COVID-19 vaccine will not result in an attack on these placental forming cells. And clinical trials, all right, typically avoid recruiting pregnant women, but it can't stop those who have been recruited to become pregnant, right? And interestingly, during the Pfizer vaccine tests, they found 23 women volunteers who started off, in the study, ended up becoming pregnant. And out of these 23, only one suffered a pregnancy loss, and that was an individual who actually received the placebo, not actually the vaccine. Right, and as we know, pregnancy losses happen, even to the best of us. So in Malaysia, and I think that link may be misconstrued because at this juncture, the government of Malaysia has made a decision to not advise pregnant women to actually get vaccinated, or individuals who are undergoing fertilization treatment or whatever it is, right? And I'll tell you why this is the case. It's not because of the similarities between the syncytin and the spike protein. It is purely because when we do these clinical trials traditionally, clinical trials do not include pregnant women, individuals who are extremely old, individuals, for example, who are having multiple different comorbidities, because they normally work on healthy individuals, as well as kids. That is the reason why, we also don't have, a prescription for vaccines for the kids yet, because we don't know what the dosage is going to be like. We don't know what the suitable regimen is going to be like. And it's all about hedging the bets, right? In identifying who to actually target, especially when our amounts of vaccines are still limited and we have to prioritize. But what we do know, all right, and there are many countries out there who are actually recommending pregnant women to actually get vaccinated, is because COVID-19 has been shown to pose a greater risk hazard to pregnant women and their babies. The CDC, the WHO, and many other reports have come out to show that pregnant women with COVID-19 have an increased risk of severe illnesses, including illnesses that result in ICU admissions, mechanical ventilation, as well as death, as compared to those with non-pregnant women of reproductive age. And pregnant women with COVID-19, when they compare that to pregnant women without COVID-19, there's an increased risk of adverse pregnancy outcomes such as preterm births as well. So with regards to COVID-19 affecting women's fertility, it is 100% false. To the question, when should pregnant women actually begin to be vaccinated in Malaysia, I think it's a purely policy decision rather than one that is, based on fear of its risk on them.
So to put it
Back to you, Joshua.
to put it simply, what's your verdict if you're trying to conceive or if you're pregnant when it comes to vaccines? Is it okay for people trying to conceive or pregnant women to take the vaccines?
Yeah, because the COVID-19 vaccine does not target the human reproductive organs or cells. So absolutely, yeah. And I'm quite certain as the policy evolves, that will be it.
What about this, there's this claim that's always been going on and on that vaccines can cause autism.
Yeah, that can be another hour, and I and I don't want that to dominate our conversation. In fact, sometimes by talking about it, although it's important, I believe it's also adding sort of the word's not relevance, but adding some legitimacy to the claims. The reality is that with regards to autism, it is very unfortunate that what has been established as fraudulent science by an individual named Andrew Wakefield and his colleagues in 1998 regarding the MMR vaccine and its link to autism continues to influence perspectives and decisions of many parts around the world. Yeah. And really, this is the single reason why a disease which we thought we had eradicated decades ago is now making a comeback. I want to make this very clear. Just like all vaccines have adverse reactions, I'm not denying or discounting the individual experiences of people. But when we are discussing in the context of a utilitarian philosophy, in the context of public health, in context of greater good, we have to come back to benefit and cost ratios. And it's very evident in any scale that we want to measure. The decision to not vaccinate regarding MMR is far more damaging. And I'm quite certain as, we see, countries like Israel, who obviously have had the privilege, to vaccinate their population a lot faster, at least for this given period of time, they seem to be the first ones to be able to get back to some sense of normality, where economic sectors can open and there's greater confidence. And, the healthcare, will not be, burdened and the crazy costs out there. So coming back again to autism, I think sometimes as scientists, because the way we do things is to, dispel a hypothesis. So when we say that there is no link, between, or no link has been discovered between vaccines and autism, it actually means that there is absolutely no evidence that, confirms this relationship.
Okay, thank you for those insights. I want to move to the viewers' questions really quick here because I want to dedicate a good amount of time for the questions that our viewers have posted on the comments section. So Yu Ming Lee asked, can the vaccines be combined into one single dose? And you can answer this as as detailed or as briefly as you want as well, because there are a couple over here as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Joshua's, I guess, hint that I should keep my answer short. So, we obviously can discuss this in further detail, Yun Ming. Thanks for the question. There's obviously benefits of a single dose shot. And I think among the different vaccines Malaysia has procured, the CanSino Bio vaccines, one dose. So the thing is that, again, a lot of this work is done by evidence. And the evidence is based on the clinical trials. And the clinical trials were done in 2 doses. And so, basically, with 1 dose, they're already seeing effective, response, whether it's a sterilizing immunity or just an effective immunity. The difference is whether it actually inhibits transmission and infection, or does it also, stop the severity of the infection. And at this moment in time, if you're talking about 1 dose, I'm convinced that it will stop the latter. I'm not certain whether it's going to help with, real herd immunity and transmissions. There's just not enough data as such. So I would recommend, unless proper clinical trials are done with a single dose and actually compared side by side with those with dual dose, it is important that we stick to the regimens that were tested in the clinical trials.
Okay, next question. Wendy Go asks, I have several drug allergies which include morphine, the penicillin group, NSAIDs, and anything with sulfur components. Can I still take the vaccine?
Yeah, I think, Wendy, I'm sorry, because I think each individual is going to be very different. As we talked about how the risks are low, but, you could be the 5 in a million, right? So what I would really actively encourage you is to speak to your, medical specialist, and you clearly are a very educated person. You know exactly what you're allergic to. So, they could profile you and actually see, what were your responses to previous immune vaccines, and actually based on that, make a more, personalized decision for you. But yes, knowing your real personal, medical history is extremely important in making this step.
I think I just want to reiterate that last line again, knowing, and be honest with your doctors, just state, whatever kind of medical history that you have, so that they can give a better assessment on whether you can or cannot take the vaccine or any medication, in fact. Yeah. The next question by Mo Lo. Can people with cancer or other diseases or comorbidities take the vaccine?
Yeah. Again, in fact, people with comorbidities, in fact, I'm going to exploit the fact that I'm obese to actually be one of the earlier ones to get the vaccine. So, in fact, people with comorbidities have a higher risk of COVID-19 severity in terms of infections. And so if you actually look at the Malaysian sort of phase 1, 2, 3 in terms of prioritizing who gets the vaccine first, that's the group that actually is going to get. There was actually an excellent, cancer survivor and cancer society discussion the other day together with some experts. And I think the Malaysian experts are inconsistent. For cancer patients in general, because again, especially the lung and oral cancer and some blood hematological cancers, they have also a higher risk of a poorer response to a COVID-19 vaccine, COVID-19 infection. So cancer patients actually are allowed to actually get their vaccination. But this again depends on where they are with their cycle, what is the state of their immune system. So for those individuals who are taking immunotherapy, where you might be activating your immune system, you might want to complete your cycle first before you actually embark on the COVID-19. And I'm sure your medical oncologists and therapists physicians will be able to advise you on when you can schedule your vaccination.
Tosun has a question. Can we take the flu vaccine at the same time at the same time we take the COVID-19 vaccine? Or how long do I need to wait if I have taken the flu vaccine? I guess in a more general sense, if I've taken the COVID-19 vaccine, can I take other vaccines as well?
Yeah, so at this juncture, the advice is varied, but the universal advice is that there's nothing that's going to suggest that there is great contraindication, that it's going to be, very, very bad if you actually take both vaccines. But one of the things that's suggested is basically, to have at least a window of 2 weeks between the different types of vaccines. So just giving your body a chance to, recover, because, the influenza viruses are different than the SARS-CoV virus. So you are, getting your immune system, to react and respond and to produce, all the different types of proteins and cells, to combat adaptive immune response now. So I would, sort of again, look at the different types of vaccines that you might be taking. It should not stop you from taking your COVID-19, but it's probably a good idea to look at some of the recent recommendations of how to just schedule them.
I see.
Joshua?
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to a question we had earlier, which is about so-called the effectiveness of all these different types of vaccines. As you are already aware, Malaysia will be receiving different types of vaccines. We have vaccines coming from the US and from China. There's even a COVID-19 study right now that involves the one of the China vaccines. Some people may be wondering, is there a preferred choice of vaccine? Is one vaccine better than the other, and does it really matter at the first place? And maybe you could also elaborate, why do we need so many different types of vaccines? Why don't we just have one standard vaccine?
Yeah, I really like this question because, it really captures, how our current society, sort of the state of humanity, where, the need to choose, the need to compare, the need to be as good or better than the neighbor, or the fear of being shortchanged, and I think, going back like just 10 months ago, we were just like, oh my God, when is the vaccine coming? And now suddenly, which vaccine should I choose? All right. And so let's be real. It's really not about choosing a car or a Coca-Cola or even a boyfriend or girlfriend. Yeah. Different vaccine designs. All right. So the question of why we have so many is really chosen, because it was a competition between different groups and industry to have the unique advantage, which, basically to be different, because this was a scale that we never ever had. It was a virus that it's a unique and novel new one. And so each one of them have advantages and disadvantages. And as we know, with the changing mutational landscape of the virus, there is no universal best vaccine. The fact is that while there might be a vaccine that is better than a certain group of people, for a certain group of people to take, just like how we are now learning about cancer drugs is better suited for some individuals or not, and we call it personalized medicine. The fact is that it will take years before we can potentially predict which vaccine is specifically better for individual me and you. And what matters is that the efficacy numbers that have been has been defined by the many different clinical trials out there is that it is good enough. So your vaccine does not need to be perfect. What it needs to be is good enough, and that's really what matters. And we should really be blessed with the arrival of the first batch of vaccines and the planned national rollout on the 26th. We are really in a better position than the billions out there in the world.
But,
and so my point is, sorry, go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah, but if I do not want to take any risks, can I just rely on others to take the vaccine and just enjoy the benefits of the herd immunity?
Yeah. It's funny because you think that your no action is actually not taking a risk, when actually that action alone is the biggest risk that you're actually taking. But even not on an individual level, I think, I like the way, my student Jamie, and Arjun, they talk about how getting vaccinated is like wearing a mask. It really isn't about protecting you, but it's also about protecting your community. Hashtag kita jaga kita. All right. And most vaccines are preventable diseases, spread through, human contact. And so when one person in a community gets the disease, it can easily spread to other people. And so it's really about breaking that chain of infection. And ultimately, it's about us protecting our human race and developing national and hopefully ultimately a global herd immunity. As my friend Kai always talks about, how vaccines is not just a chance for us to exercise our power of choice, but it's also to sacrifice for a higher purpose. And let's face it, I wouldn't even call it a sacrifice when we actually measure the risk of not and actually vaccinating.
Would former COVID-19 patients, recovered patients, be required to take the vaccines as well? I mean, should they take the vaccines as well?
Yeah. So when we actually talk about this is actually a good question, and actually we don't have a lot of data, and that's why, it's not that conclusive. There was a recent paper that came out recently to show that most individuals actually will have some amount of immune response, be it antibodies, T cells or B cells, even after 8 months of infection, all right? And so this gives us hope that this immune response, your natural immune response to the virus, can actually elicit a response. But also you have heard of how individuals who are getting reinfected, and that tells you that actually for some people, the natural immune response sometimes wanes or is too weak to actually elicit a response when you are reinfected again. And this is because the natural exposure to virus is affected by multiple factors. For example, how much virus actually went into that individual when he was exposed the first time? How much did the virus actually block the body from triggering a proper immune response? And this is where vaccines differ. When we talk about vaccines, because they are formulated through a rigorous process, they provide an individual that's vaccinated with the right dose of the viral protein or mRNA or sort of killed vaccine. And that is the proper or the adequate amount to generate the robust immune response that then results in a much more uniform and higher level of antibodies as well as an immune response generated compared to a natural infection. So my answer to you is, if you already had COVID-19, the evidence shows that you can still benefit from the vaccine. And so my advice is also make sure if you have had COVID-19, you contact your health provider, be honest again, and actually get advice. And the current advice at this juncture is just make sure that you at least are 14 days, post your first day of infection, and you are no longer symptomatic before you actually vaccinate. And this is just another way that we are still learning about our immune response to COVID-19. And again, I reiterate what we do know from the recent developments in Israel and the many countries who are now seeing, like for example, Melbourne, although they did not start the vaccination program, with stringent, processes in place, we hope that we can return back to normal.
All right, thank you very much. I think, okay, just kind of a quick one, because because looking at the comments, we're still receiving this question, can pregnant women take the vaccine? So probably just before we wrap up, for those who are late to the stream, you can probably answer that, perhaps give them the answer for that question again, if that's all right.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. So, right, essentially the claims that COVID-19 vaccine actually targets, a specific protein called the syncytin-1, which is located on the placenta-forming cells, essentially is false, right? And not just essentially, it's false, period. And so the evidence at this moment in time shows that, pregnant women can actually benefit from actually being immunized with a vaccine, especially because they are at high risk. But the reason why many countries, including Malaysia, have not listed pregnant women as one of the candidates to actually be prioritized in the current COVID vaccine or immunization program in Malaysia is because clinical trials did not test efficacy on them. And so, as I had shared some data of how some women that started out on these clinical trial studies ended up being pregnant, the evidence, shows that it's safe. But I would, defer back to the government because at this juncture, it's a policy decision on prioritization. And I'm sure at some point you will see that all pregnant women will also be offered the vaccine.
All right, I think that's all the time that we have for questions. But before we sign off, I just want to say a very big thank you to Professor Abhi. Thank you for spending the time to provide a better perspective on the COVID-19 vaccine. I have to tell everyone, I've learned something today, and I hope everyone who's watching this has a better picture of the issue as well. Thanks for watching everyone. And if you would like to stay updated on news or future live sessions, click the like button on the Star Facebook page and subscribe to the Star Online YouTube channel as well. Once again, I'm Joshua Lim, and I wish you all a good night. Stay safe and stay informed. Thank you so much, Dr. Abhi.
Thank you so much, Joshua.
All right.
And thank you everyone for joining. Yeah.
See y'all.
Bye.